I've tried to ask this question. Whenever anybody behaves, regardless of the nature, regardless of the situation, what are the phases through which his actions go? What are the smallest units into which I can break up his big action without losing a sense of continuity? Now, let's take something very simple. Perhaps a fire were to break out in this studio or down the street. Let me call that a happening or an event or a stimulus. Or say a small kitten were to suddenly come into this room and get on top of my rostrum. That would be a happening. Then, if you or I were in the presence of the happening, it would make some impact on us. I would see it or hear it. It would affect my nervous system. And if I were in full possession of all of my faculties, it would make some, as we say, neurological impact. I would know about it. But that isn't all I would do. Something else would happen. I would proceed to evaluate. That is, I would size up this situation. I'd think about it. I'd interpret it. I'd wonder about it somehow. In other words, I would evaluate it, and evaluation being a complicated thing, a lot of things would go on. I would see it, hear it, smell it, and interpret it. I would make some assumptions. I would assume something about this, and I might feel somehow. Thus, if the kitten came in, I would see it, and I might assume that this is a very pleasant interruption, a very pleasant way of adding a little drama to what might not be so dramatic, and I might feel pleasant. Or I might assume that somebody didn't do his job well, in which case I would feel angry. In other words, I would see, assume, and feel, and evaluate the situation. Then, I might talk and or act. Now, I suppose if flames broke out in the room that I'm in at this moment, I suppose I might say to somebody, what do we do about it? Or let's get out of here. Or look, isn't someone going to do anything about it? Or I might act. In other words, I just depart from these surroundings very quickly. Or I might proceed perhaps to go over and try to stamp it out. Now then, it is my basic premise that these four things happen with almost every bit of human behavior. Now, I admit that there are some occasions when phase 3 doesn't seem to exist. For example, if you shoot a pinpoint of light in my eye, that's a happening. It'll make an impact on my pupil, but I don't think I'll do much evaluating. My pupil will close. Or I think perhaps if you were suddenly to jab me with a pin, that would be the happening. It would make an impact. I would probably feel it, but I don't think I'd do any thinking about it except to jump or yell or run away or ask you to stop. So that I want to suggest that for the great important moments of human behavior, and even for the unimportant moments of human behavior, these four things happen. That's my first premise, and the first thing I'd like to ask you to think about. And something on which we can get a great deal of agreement right around the university curriculum. But I'll come back to that in a minute. I now want to make my second point, which is this. We ought to be able to distinguish between our evaluations of situations, A, which make sense, are sensible, are mature, intelligent, wise, and those which are not so intelligent, not so wise, bluntly, those which are stupid. Or we ought to be able to distinguish between, I imagine you can think that there are some things I might do if flames broke out into this room, which would be sensible. There are some things I might do which would not be sensible. And it is the thesis, or it is the basic position or theory of the students of general semantics, that every bit of human behavior, every bit of it, ought to be analyzable or distinguished into these two great categories. Some talking makes sense, some talking does not make sense. Well, I'd like just to give you a couple of quick illustrations.